Let's begin today's class with a question. What is the most unique property of living organisms? Well, you will be coming up with many answers, but the answer that I'm looking for here is reproduction. Now the question comes in, what is reproduction? Reproduction is the ability of organisms to give rise to one of its own kind, which you have studied in your earlier classes as well. Like a mango tree gives rise to a mango plant, a human being gives birth to a human baby, so on and so forth. Now, what makes it possible for living organisms to give rise to one of its own kind? What is that guiding principle? It is about that we are going to discuss in this chapter, which is chapter number 5 in your syllabus and your textbook as well. The chapter is Heredity and Variation. Heredity and variation. Now, before we move on, I think we need to understand what is heredity. Well, this is just a revision for you because we are beginning this chapter, the first class today. So this is a revision for you. What is heredity? Heredity. Now, before we move on, I think we need to understand what is heredity. Well, this is just a revision for you because we are beginning this chapter, the first class today. So this is a revision for you. What is heredity? Heredity is the transfer of characters from one generation to another. Heredity is the transfer of characters from one generation to another. Now, next term that we come across is genetics. What is genetics? Genetics is the study of the process by which this transfer of characters takes place from one generation to another. It is basically a study of certain principles with the help of which you can understand the way these characters are transferred from one generation to another. Another important top point that we come across here is variation. Variation. What is variation? Now the other point that we are going to discuss here is variation. Now what is variation? Variation is the degree by which a progeny differs from their parents. Variation is the degree by which a progeny differs from their parents. Progeny means the baby that is born, the new plant that comes out. That is what is known as variation. So variation, we can write it down, is the degree by which a progeny differs from their parents. Progeny differs from their parents. We can say, take for example, a baby is born to the parent. Do they look as same as their parents? No. You take for example another, the baby is born by the same parents at the different intervals of time, the siblings. They do not look the same. There are certain differences that is always there amongst brothers and brothers and brothers and sisters and sisters. That small differences that we see is what is known as the variation. This variation, we see it in the case of twins as well. Now, before moving further, I think we need to understand about who studied this particular, principles for the very first time. And we come across a name called Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel conducted experiments on pea plant, hybridization experiments on pea plants, and he came up with various principles of inheritance in living organisms. But his work was not recognized for a long time until it was rediscovered by Hugo de Vries and Correns. And from their understanding, it was deduced that it was Gregor Mendel who first conducted the experiments on the inheritance, on the principles of inheritance. That is why Gregor Mendel is known as the father of genetics. He conducted his experiments on garden pea plants in a small garden that he had, because he was an Austrian monk. He lived in a small room, and the laws of inheritance. He came up with number of laws of inheritance. We'll discuss that later on. But before that, we need to understand some of the important terms that we come across when we study genetics. The gene is the first term that we come across. Gene is the first term that we come across. And what is a gene? Gene is the smallest unit of heredity. Well, we have discussed in brief about Gregor Mendel. Now, I think for genetic studies, there are a few terms which we need to understand and remember, and let's discuss about them. Let us first discuss about the gene. Gene is the smallest unit of heredity. It is the smallest unit of heredity which is located at a definite point. That definite point is called the locus of the chromosome. Gene can be a small segment of DNA in higher organisms, or it could be RNA in some cases of viruses. So gene is the smallest unit of heredity which is located at a definite point. That is a locus. Point is called the locus on the chromosome. It can be a segment of DNA or RNA in the case of viruses, which carry biological information from one generation to another. So genes are the smallest unit of heredity which carries biological information from one generation to another. Another important point that we come across here is allele. Now, the gene or the factors, as Mendel talked about, has two alternative forms. These alternative forms are known as the allele. The genes have two alternative forms. For example, let's take the gene for tallness is located on two chromosomes. As we already know, chromosomes are always in pairs. That is why we say 23 pairs of chromosomes in human beings. So chromosomes are always in pairs. Since the chromosomes are pairs, in the same gene locus, at the same point on the two chromosomes, there are two alternative forms of a particular gene that is present. Like this, two alternative forms. These alternative forms are known as alleles. The alleles are the alternative forms of the gene present on the homologous chromosome. For example, let this be two homologous chromosomes, a pair of homologous chromosomes. If at this particular point, the gene for tallness is present on one of the homologous chromosomes, exactly at the same point, on the other member of the homologous pair will have the gene locus. I mean the same alternative form of that particular gene. So this is what is called the allele. Alleles are always in alternative forms. Now next we come across is the next term that we come across here is dominant. Dominant means something which suppresses the effect of the other. Dominant man. He dominates rest of the friends that is there in his group. So dominant gene. Dominant gene is expressed. Dominant gene is the gene that is expressed even when only one of it is present. Take for example the case of tall and dwarf. Both these are present together, but the expression that is seen from outside is always of tall. Though the other homologous chromosome will have the dwarf gene as well, but the effect, the outward effect that is seen is only that of the tallness. So this tall is known as the dominant gene. In a hybrid condition, this is a hybrid condition in which the two different type of genes are present together, but only one that is expressed here is the tallness. So this tall is the dominant gene. So a dominant gene is expressed even when only one dose of that particular allele is present. Even when only one dose is present. It does not have to be both same. Only when one is only present, then also it shows its effect. This is called dominant. And the one that does not show its effect in a hybrid condition is said to be recessive gene. The gene that does not show its effect, or it remains suppressed by the dominant gene. It cannot show itself. It will show itself only in a homozygous state. Such a gene is said to be a recessive gene. Now we talk about locus. Locus is another important term that we need to remember. Locus is the point on the chromosome in which a particular gene is located. Now, this location of that particular gene on the chromosome remains the same. It is same in the case of all human. After we have studied about the locus, let's carry on with the next term that we come across is the genotype. Genotype is the actual genetic composition. Actual genetic composition. The other that we come across is the phenotype. Phenotype is the visible expression of the gene. Now, the genotype could be this. Genotype could be this, but what we see from outside is the tall. Though the genetic composition is both tall and dwarf together, the external expression is tall, which suggests that this is the phenotypic expression. That means what we see from outside, this is visible. But what it actually is, what type of genes it is actually made up of, to study about that is called the genotype. Genotype is the actual genetic composition. Now, this phenotype can be influenced by the environment as well. Whatever expression that is seen from outside, after the influence of the environment and along with the genetic makeup, is what is known as the phenotypic expression. Now, genotype can be of three types. That is homologous, homozygous, when both the alleles are same. When both the alleles are same. Or for tall and dwarf, both the alleles are same. Or homozygous also means that during gametogenesis, during gamete formation, they always give rise to one gamete. Like in this case of tall, pure tall that we see here, the gamete that will be produced will be only with capital T. Here also only with small t. So only one type of gamete is produced in a homozygous condition.